Alright, and I think I'm going to do a little bit of a change up here and talk a little bit more about contemporary stuff since I've been dabbling about ancients and philosophy for a number of weeks now, and I figured it'd be nice to return back and talk about other stuff and get to one of a video request that my friend asked me to make a while back because he was interested in what I thought about capital and this kind of like post-COVID analysis that I've done a little bit of on this channel before, but I've never really flushed it out more than what it already had in kind of other generalities videos where I just kind of mash up a bunch of stuff together. But I don't really want to go off and talk about a thinker in particular, but I did want to talk a little bit about some of the attitude in real life that I took in and saw for myself, where there's a lot of one of the main things I think I noticed the most out of this kind of, not just the bourgeois middle class, if you will, but even the working class, my coworkers and stuff like that. Most of the lockdown and the pandemic was kind of how can I plunder this on the stock market? How can I make the most of this? How can I take this brief moment of chaos and make the market go in my favor? And this obviously was troublesome to someone like me, because I don't think that this being the forefront of participation in a greater society is not only sustainable, but just an ethical good, if you will. And there's this another product that is being drummed up in research and development right now of the COVID vaccine, like in a pill form, I guess. And I had some people that I was talking with one day, and they were talking about trying to invest in the firm that is looking to put this product out by the end of the year. And I don't think they had any interest in the actual product itself. They just wanted to, jump on this casino game, is really the best way to put it. And this kind of what marks, if we want to go all the way back to early theory of like anti-capital, I suppose. And when he talks about fictitious capital, he didn't really think much of it because it was the Industrial Revolution. It's just a consequence of his time. But I think this fictitious capital is actually more relevant to our lives today as this kind of post-industrial stage, where you kind of have really just this speculation regurgitating over and over again within the markets of just waiting for some kind of happening within society. It doesn't matter whether it's even a good or a bad happening. It's just that there's a happening, and we can make the most out of it and try to reap the benefits, even though there's actually nothing productive about it. It's not like a wartime effort. It's not like it's the startup of some great project that's gonna create jobs or anything like this. It's just literal economic chaos analysis, to be kind of blunt about it. And this is something that Schumpeter would talk about, and just the successes of capital itself. The idea that we could actually lock down countries and these client states and this empire for months, even years in some cases. Like, what is going on with Canada, right? Like, are they ever going to reopen? This idea that you can just have all these people, at home, just consuming and not really doing much else would be totally that would destroy society. It wouldn't even be on the table. Let's be realistic here. Within our lifetime, even I don't even think we could pull it off in the 90s with the way technology and just this kind of alienation and not just the worker anymore. That's passé now. Even the capitalist class itself isn't really necessary anymore because it's just so perpetuating within these corporations and their kind of self-sustainment, the kind of sabotage, which I think you could say that the lockdown for a lot of the bourgeois class and the elites and the wealth inequality to come, and what that says really about the left. They were nowhere to be seen for any of this. Anyone could have called this, and the ramifications of wealth inequality was like you shrunk up the savings of the middle by like double or half of that, and you really gave it to the richest people on the planet. Their wealth grew in historic rates, of course. But I thought it was kind of interesting maybe to tie in some of Schumpeter's ideas where you have this kind of intellectual class that, well, they think they're really intellectuals, but they're actually just kind of midwit, really. You would think people who really don't have any more skills to offer. They don't really do anything. They just kind of critique capitalism and kind of go about perpetuating towards this socialist intellectual system and their own kind of reification of power. And I think maybe that is kind of interesting with crypto, because I think something I've kind of observed from crypto is people who are interested in crypto aren't necessarily just interested in making off like bandits necessarily. There's a lot of ideological reasoning behind it, right? There's a lot of dissidents and people that I enjoy who are in crypto to kind of stick it to the man, stick it to the money system, if you will. And I'm not saying that this is true and there isn't a lot of Fed going on within the markets, and that's maybe a conversation for a different day. But nonetheless, I think that the kind of mystique of being able to dabble in crypto and actually make it, quote unquote, doesn't necessarily have to do with the thrill of just perpetuating this capital. It actually has this kind of prestige, I think, this kind of social aspect to it, that's this kind of coolness to it to an extent. And this is kind of interesting to maybe push up against what Schumpeter thought of this kind of new prestige that has to come about over capital out of its successes, where, you have this kind of capitalist success and relativity of poverty. At some point it's kind of like, well, what else is actually interesting? Because that's just kind of I think another complexity to maybe throw in is as societies continue to intensify in this kind of complexity of technology and trying to navigate in that sort of aspect, you already have 20 or so % of the population that kind of sticks up their nose at being a wagey, but they don't ultimately have the merits to really do much else. How do you facilitate that going forward? How do you factor that into any kind of theory or any other ideas that you want to really have in a greater social project? But I think this is actually somewhat optimistic. I think the numbers are far worse. I think you're seeing more and more people get left behind who any other time in history would have done, they would have lived a full and considered dignified life. But now you have this vacuum of more and more people not really having much to contribute, and the distribution of responsibility really overall, and the prestige that goes with that, as another kind of undermining of this kind of vacuum of, I think this is how you end up with these kind of ideological dreamers on social media, just arguing with each other, perpetuating these never-ending kind of utilitarian takes against each other, and how their ideology is kind of sold as this engine of thought in a way, and the ramifications of that. This is kind of another form of this kind of fictitious capital where you send in your takes to this intellectual to read off and kind of feed back into, but this is just basically what any other time we would probably just consider conversation or just a Q&A or something like that. Now it's just this kind of monetized way of doing things, that I think is kind of interesting to maybe consider this stage of this kind of post-industrial, really post, the decadence of it, and the kind of way of sealing off nature for such long periods of time, or being able to just tap into it. We've totally emasculated this idea that we're actually even a part of nature, right? We're these kind of plunderers, just going about our business outside of the world, to an extent, asserted and given. And I think that's one of the main things that he kind of does with how he kind of gets back around to these arguments of actually perpetuating back towards like capitalism and democracy, and even the socialist ideal to some extent, and how the kind of successes of that bring about its own undermining would really be a rough summation. And I think that's really relevant to right now. I think a lot of his ideas in those texts are really important, and could be really useful today, because I think we're really seeing that all around us. And I think there really is something that could be said about not just the psyche of the working class, who could have likely lost their job, at least temporarily. And when you do that to someone, right, you can cut them a check, but what does that really say about like the greater like social relations, this kind of capitalistic mythos of bootstrap mentality even? How do you sustain that in 2021 after lockdowns, where you laid off people for large portions of time? Society, it wasn't ideal by any stretch for nearly anyone, but the world did continue turning, and you didn't even need your job, or didn't really have any imprint on the local community. I don't think alienation has ever been so explicit in that kind of sense. And, what are the ramifications of that going forward? And this is something also that he kind of brushes up on when he talks about, if you're kind of shifting from a capitalist society to a socialist society, or vice versa, you don't want to do it too quickly, or else it'll require a revolution to get to see it through. He thinks that there's actually a way to kind of navigate towards whichever polarity that it is, because he ultimately thinks that if this was reversed, like if we were living in a socialist society, we would be looking for these kind of like capitalist ideals or capitalist logic. And yeah, I think this is really interesting to brush up on today, where ultimately the success and cultivation of capital in our lives day to day is totally ruptured to the point where it's really kind of almost brushed to the side now because of the curation of its own undermining. And you see that with the nation state and the kind of and the rightful concern of not just immigration, but the land within it. What's the purpose of our land? Is it to sustain our own people, or are we selling this to international groups that are undermining our own markets and ultimately plundering us again? And is that morale? Is that a society that people want to live in? And I think the notion that the markets should just lead the way, and everything is hunky dory, and we have this freedom to express ourselves. It doesn't really count. It doesn't really factor in that people are kind of drawn into discipline and a greater understanding than just plundering nature or these social situations. Even nature itself, it's just alienated and kind of in framing and a Heideggerian approach to this, putting nature into reserve and just sealing it off for later. Or even the relationship with nature itself, it's in this plunderous attitude. And I think that's why there's this kind of growing antagonism towards it on the right, and you're beginning to see over time the denigration, I think, on these kind of intellectual spaces of capitalist logic and letting the market have its say, and the mystification is dying off rather rapidly, I think. And that's kind of a white pill, I think, to a lot of us, actually, to some extent. I've said this before, and I think I'll kind of reiterate it. I don't just sit around and just shit on capital just because of some kind of utopian, or even, I guess to some extent kind of utopian, if I'm honest about my idealism. But I don't really have this kind of, I'm just sitting around and I'm just upset about authority and I want to be the one in charge, and I want the power. It's not really about that. It's more about seeing that this is like really the ends of capital itself. It's vestiges have totally dominated anything that helped make really the nation state what it was to begin with, and the kind of limitation really of markets that you see in all the way back, as we were talking about with Aristotle. Aristotle kind of had this measured sort of, you want to kind of have this locality and sort of investment and rational understanding of input within the locality that I think is just long gone today, right? It's just all kind of liquidated on social media now. That's the replacement of the community, of the coffee house, of the intellectual vanguards, or pseudos such as myself, trying to share ideas. I'm doing this in my room on a webcam. I'm not at some coffee shop in Paris or some intellectual land like that. It's all virtual now. It's the death of community, quite literally. Or I've said in other videos before, you could actually use this mode of technology, I think, to create communities again in these other spaces. And I think you're starting to see that more and more. And I think there will be big political ramifications for that in a later day. And I hope to even participate in it to some extent. But yeah, this was just a quick little video, really, of kind of surveying what I think of things going on right now within not just economics and but just this overall kind of social analysis, really, of capital ultimately undermining itself from its own successes, and actually, to some extent, really laying the foundation for how you can end up with this kind of technocratic rule of anonymity. You notice that they're always hostile towards people anonymous online. I'm just a face reveal guy. I've always just had that kind of shitlord kind of spine to me on the internet, even as a child, as I've talked about. So I've never really given a fuck. I just kind of go for it. I don't really feel the need to, do avatars when I've always just been a kind of weirdo intellectual in my personal life to begin with. So to that extent, I don't really have any sort of skin in the game, but I think it is kind of interesting to see how hostile they are towards anonymous discussions and what the possibilities could be of being able to break free of your kind of American social credit score, I suppose, in a way. And but yet, when they get to rule through markets, through corporations, through the lobbying process into democracy in this anonymous way, it's celebrated and cherished. But when the enemies do that, this is a big problem, and I think that is one of the subtle projections that I think you could find within the elite journos and their hostilities towards internet anonymity as a whole. But yeah, this was just a brief little video. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to cut it off here.